perhaps we'll get started, even though I am very aware that people will be joining us maybe for the next few minutes. There were some delays in the lunch queues, perhaps. But it is my very great pleasure to be welcoming you to this session on translation and the visual arts. It's something that is very close to my own heart. And actually today we have a variety of these for you. We have visual arts in the sense of illustrations in books. We'll be looking at TV series also. And we'll be looking at VR, virtual reality, maybe looking at something like gaming around Shakespeare too. So I think the way we will tackle this so that we can relocate to the venue for the plenary later is that we will have each of the papers of 20 minutes first, and then we will come back together to do the questions, if that's also okay with you. Sensei. Okay, so it's my great pleasure, first of all, to introduce Oshima Hisao from Kyushu University, where he's an associate professor of drama and has published on The Tempest and on Hamlet previously. But today, we're lucky to get coverage of a topic that's very close to Wasada's heart, with Enpaku right here. We're going to be hearing about Subuchi Shoyo's translation and illustrations in the complete works of Shakespeare. So yes, thank you very much, Sensei.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. And thank you very much for this honorable opportunity to present my study for you. My title is, as you've seen on the screen, illustrations are often regarded secondary and peripheral. Gustav Flaubert bitterly says, illustrations a modern invention which marks literature. But the recent exhibition on the frontispiece and illustration is Meiji literature, you see here, and the book edited by Tomoyuki Deguchi, poet, show many writers of the Edo and Meiji periods were required to write as well as draw for their books. And some Edo writers drew sketches first and then wrote text. These writers are Ozaki Koyo, Koda Rohan, Higuchi Ichio, Shimazaki Toson, Izumu Kyoka, Tayama Katai, and even Natsume Soseki. And Tsubochi also belonged to this group, and he was the inheritor of the Japanese bookmaking tradition, Wahon tradition. He published his theory of novel, the essence of novels, Shousetsu Shinzuri, in the Wahon style. Japanese papers stitched into these 9 Wahon booklets. In his novel, Humors of Modern Scholars, Tosei Shosei Katari, which he wrote following his series of novels, he drew several direction sketches from which painter Shisui Nagahara created book illustrations. Here you see 2 prodigal sons, 2 prodigal students going to see their favorite geishas. In his historical play, Lady Maki, Maki no Kata, Shoyo's direction sketch is full of direction depth. For the painter Seitei Watanabe, whose frontispiece depicts Lady Maki in a hesitating position to kill the young Prince General Minamoto Sane Tomo, holding a short sword in her hand. This might be soon treated in a Tiger TV drama, now being broadcast by NHK. This illustration for Shoyo's first translation of Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. His direction sketch is not extant, but the illustration shows what Shoyo expects from the illustration. That is, the dramatic psychological tension. Seitei Watanabe's woodcut shows how anxiously Brutus and Cassius are watching Caesar's triumphant march. Shoyo found a very good painter. For Seitei Watanabe attended the Paris Universal Exposition in 1878 and knew very well about the Roman style, architecture and fashion and so on. You are already well informed about him, so there is a brief description about him. He formed Bunge Kyokai in 1908, which led the movement of new drama and trained actors and actresses in the Western style. They staged The Merchant of Venice at Kabuki Theatre in 1906 and Hamlet in Hongo Theatre in 1907. In 1909, he started his series of Shakespearean translation with Hamlet and finished this thorough grand literary project of Shakespeare's complete works with Poems Volume 2nd in 1928. To celebrate and commemorate this, the Drama Museum was built with a facade based on the design of the Elizabethan Theatre Fortune in Waseda University, as you know. And the statue maybe you saw before represents Shoyo giving his last lecture on Shakespeare. And this is his life work. He devoted his last 19 years to this project. These are his second series, complete works of Shakespeare. And Shoyo's views on Shakespeare are expressed in volume 40, Introduction to Shakespeare Study. Each book is beautifully bound as a pocket book you can carry in the sleeve of kimono when you go to a theater. Shakespeare bust is painted with white and gold on the light blue front cover. This is my collection. I bought at the Kanda Symposium. When you study, however, the illustrations in his translations, the situation for you is rather complicated because his translations were published in 4-book formats: single edition, famous works, complete works, and 1-volume complete works, and different by different printers: Toyokan, Toyamabo, Waseda University Press, Chuo Koronsha, Sogensha, Shinjusha, and Daisan Shokan. The picture is the most recent one, 1-book complete works, containing no illustration. On the other hand, the earliest editions I checked so far, one of them was Julius Caesar, has many illustrations. Frontispiece is black and white picture of Theatre National Odeon, followed by 14 woodcuts, and one black and white picture of Sir Henry Beerbohm Tree as Anthony in Act 3, Scene 3. I'll show you the first one. Shoyo kept this many illustration policy in the first series published by Waseda University. Many Wives of Windsor also contains frontispiece, which is black and white picture of Miss Ellen Terry as Mistress Page, Beerbohm Tree as Falstaff, and Mrs. Kendall as Mistress Ford, followed by two black and white pictures, stage pictures of Falstaff. And it contains map of Windsor. I'll show you later. And followed by 14 woodcuts. So frontispiece. And please look at the comic calligraphic letters of the title. Probably made by Shoyo himself. Here, illustration and map of Windsor. And the famous comic scene. Falstaff thrown into the river. And this is King John in the first series. On the right, there is a different version of Shakespeare, but beautifully colored. And on the right, Beerbohm Tree as King John. And this is a frontispiece and title page. Arthur and Hubert. And King John also contains a map. Place half in England, half in France, because it treats with the European geopolitics, including England. The Western system of mandatory education was introduced in Meiji period. So Shoyo wished readers to understand scenes and characters through illustrations, including maps and stage photos. This shows how Shoyo was an educator, Meiji educator in the westernized Japan. The Western system of mandatory education, Gakusei, was introduced in the Meiji period, whilst the private terracotta system of Edo was abolished. These are authorized elementary school textbooks, history, moral, and leader used in Meiji, illustrated with many maps and woodcuts, and bound in the Wahon style. Visual methods of education were encouraged, taught, and employed. Maps and illustrations were regarded as effective teaching tools. And Shoyo was also a professional editor of these textbooks. And he also edited pictorial journals. So he was immersed in the visual world of Meiji. I brought these textbooks, Wahon textbooks, and if you are interested, you can touch, see closely. So, if you don't mind touching in the Corona age. The educator Shoyo gives advice in Introduction to Shakespeare Study he says, first understand Shakespeare is completely different from modern Western dramatists such as Ibsen. Shakespeare is very elite even in old Western drama, but Shakespeare has much in common with Japanese traditional theaters, Kyorei, Bunraku, and Kabuki. Read Chikamatsu, Namboku, and Mokuami, famous Japanese Kabuki playwrights, before reading Shakespeare. Then finally read his complete works of Shakespeare translated into Japanese. He says about illustrations in Japanese, 文中の心を知らしむる助け help, help for readers to understand the heart of text. And he says, in order to understand the theatrical art of completely different race, fashion, and age, you should read its text very carefully. But you should also grasp its general outline through the direct impressions of illustrations. Otherwise, you will have quite wrong ideas about Shakespeare, associating his drama with the Japanese traditional theaters. So he recommends the Leopold Shakespeare edited by F.T. Fangal for its many cuts, and the works of William Shakespeare edited by C. Knight for its wonderful 400 illustrations. Now, let's look at his unique device of text graphic collaboration in the second series. Between the title page, in this case Hamlet, and the first scene, a colored or a black and white frontispiece is inserted. Over the frontispiece is a thin paraffin paper printed with relevant lines from the scene. Above, Hamlet speaks to Gertrude in her bedchamber where the ghost appears. You read these lines and imagine scenes and characters covered by the paraffin paper. こなたには何も見えぬか。はて、それ、あれを音もさせないで影のよう。Hamlet says. And below Romeo's speech just before the rite of their secret marriage. Then you open the paraffin cover, you will find beautiful frontispieces. The frontispieces often help readers to grasp the essence of the play, introducing some main characters. Frontispieces are often Shakespearean paintings by famous painters or from illustrated Shakespeare's works published abroad. Shakespeare with 170 illustrations, and Shakespeare's Tragedy of Hamlet illustrated by H.J. Simmons, and so on. Illustrations, sashie, on the other hand, are black and white. They are sketches of scenes helping readers to understand what happens in the scene. Shoyo inserts 3 to 6 illustrations per one book in the second series of the complete work. His choice of illustrations tell us much about what scenes he regards dramatically important. These are Ophelia's mud scenes. And he notes some instances of influence of photo and illustrations on new drama stage in Japan. Sadanji's company's production of The Merchant of Venice at Tokyo Theatre, and Hamlet costume at Shinshunza, and the portrait, Portia's red costume and hat, influenced by Rembrandt's painting. And Shoyo himself was also influenced by these illustrations. Smako's Ophelia owes much to the stage picture of Ellen Terry and other illustrations. And finally, the ghost. It might be a good example of culturally familiar notion, our culturally familiar notion feeding to intercultural misconception about characters. Shoyo was much interested in ghost characters in Hamlet and Julius Caesar, inserting many illustrations about them in the first series. Because Japanese ghosts and Western ghosts have completely different background, cultural, religious, and pictorial. In Japan, ghosts often have no firm legs, hovering in the air between this world and the other. Dolefully saying repeatedly this common cliche, urameshi, which every Japanese knows. I hate. And these are ghosts in Hamlet in the earlier adaptations or translations. Dobun Kanagaki, Dobun's ghost, samurai ghost, has no legs. And Keizo Kawashima and Yuzo Tsugouchi's ghost has no legs. I think, in a sense, Shoyo reformed this Japanese ghost idea, Japanese idea of ghost, on stage and in book. Shoyo's ghost has firm legs in Bunge Kyokai production program picture, to which Shoyo maybe gave directions, and illustration in Hamlet he chose. My conclusion. So Tsugouchi first worked in the Wahon tradition, in which writers should write text as well as draw sketches. The number of illustrations in the first series of complete works shows how important illustrations were for him and his readers to understand Shakespeare's scenes and characters. These illustrations and maps suggest he was also a mage educator eager to teach visually. The number of illustrations was much diminished in the second series, but it does not mean their importance was less, but they were more focused, using the unique collaborative device of text and graphic. The following reprints have even less or no illustrations at all because of Japan's poverty and the change of book style after the war. But we should not forget the visual aspect of his Shakespeare translation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Oshima Sensei. Excellent. And I will stand because I've done plenty of sitting down after my flight from London. And again, just to say thank you so much, Oshima Sensei, for bringing your wonderful collection, well, part of your wonderful collection. It would be very risky to bring your whole collection with you to Tokyo from Kyushu. It was absolutely wonderful to this is something we could not do over all these past 3 years of conferences online. Being able to handle somebody's very delicate collection of texts is a real pleasure. Okay, who would like to ask a question of our two wonderful speakers this afternoon?
For Professor Oshima, thank you very much for your talk. And I've also always been struck by the sort of beauty of Shoryo's published works, the Shoryo Senshi and then the Panelv one, which were published during his lifetime. And I think it also extends to the quality of the print. And I recently did a little research on, for example, on Shoryo's use of Ruby Furigana and the way that he really tries to bring out the visual aspect of the kanji, which he uses. And well, this is kind of turning into a comment rather than a question. But as I said this morning, Shoryo's, he's always interested in he's always attracted to the sounds of the words, the sounds of language. But I think he's also very visual, actually. That's two sides to him. Well, what do you think of that? Do you see Shoryo as more visual or more audio, more musicality, or is there a kind of balance? Good.
Thank you very much. Kind comment. And I think Shoryo thought both of them were important for him and for the reader and audience. Maybe he visually imagined scenes, maybe drawing sketches in his mind, and offered his direction about those scenes. So, and sound also very important for him as drama director. And I think his technique was both developed as graphically and audibly.
Actually, do you know, with the Panelv one, there's always one color illustration at the front, isn't there? And then you have kind of 2 or 3 black and white illustrations through the text, which presumably is all that they could afford. It's been quite expensive to reproduce this. And are those pictures, are they mostly borrowed from Victorian sources or from 19th century illustrations?
Most of them are from Victorian illustrated Shakespeare, and many famous writers painted Shakespeare pictures as historical paintings. So maybe Shoryo was much influenced by Victorian painters and Victorian actors, such as
It's also, it strikes me as one way of foreignizing Shakespeare, because Shoryo comes to domesticate Shakespeare with the language he uses and the comparisons which he makes with Japanese culture. But using the Victorian illustrations from putting Shakespeare back in its original context.
I think so.
Thank you so much for that, Manuel Sensei. I was thinking also about, how much I use still photographs today to teach, and that idea of the foreignization or re-foreignization by including so many of those illustrations that depict a particular scene, I guess, is very interesting. Thank you. I'm going to try and be democratic and keep toggling between different sides of the room.
So are there any questions from among my left-hand side of the room, your right-hand side?
If you have a question towards
Oh, yes, of course, yes.
about the color of the illustration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's quite beautiful to see the black and white illustration of Shoyo's books. And I wanted to ask is there any project to make it colored? Because of course black and white illustration is itself beautiful, but some may think it should be colored. Because that reminds me of a sort of project in cinema. Some scholars and researchers, try to make some black and white films colored. So yeah, just wanted to know.
I hope such project will be started. I belong to the media department. Some scholars study virtual reality, and so color virtual reality Shakespeare's illustrations are very interesting.
Or should it be black and white? So no color. I don't know.
I don't know. I like both black and white, but maybe colored illustrations are very costly, so only one color picture was inserted in Shoyo's books. And in some case, only black and white frontispiece is inserted, no color pictures.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm kind of, I quite like the idea that you guys can run, run and have lots of conversations between each other, and the spirit of collaboration going. Any other questions? Tiffany? Do you mind a second hand mic?
So thank you very much for your wonderful papers. I have a question for Professor Oshima. So I was fascinated by those English illustrations that were running through the Japanese text. And one thing I thought interesting about the illustrations that you showed us is that those were illustrations not of staging. They weren't about stage performances. They were Victorian illustrations of the fiction. They were Victorian illustrations as though it had happened. And I wonder if that says something about those translations. As I say, it feels a bit unstagey. It feels, a bit more novelistic, as though he's thinking himself into those fictional worlds. So I wondered about that, and I also wondered about the Victorian nature of the pictures, because that takes us back not to Shakespeare's time, but to a little bit before he was, but maybe to 100 years earlier than when he was translating. So that's sort of two questions. One is about the fictional nature of the pictures, and the other is about the Victorian rather than early modern nature of the pictures.
So Shoyo first wrote some problems about illustrations. There are many illustrations inserted in Edo books, and often painters drew paintings freely. So Shoyo is against such practice, and he gives minute directions to painters. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for your call.
No, I mean, I'm very happy to introduce you and stay with you to the West. Okay, just to explain, due to unforeseen circumstances, Professor Rall has just joined us. I know that we have the coffee break scheduled, but what I'd like to suggest is that we include time for his paper in the next 20 minutes. If that is possible, I don't know, Matayama Sensei, does that?
The plenary starts in another building in 3. So, Hannes, do you think you can give us an abridged version of your paper?
I can give a very abridged. As long as I'm all about delivering it, I'll just get straight to it. You only have to show me where to find it.
Super.
Okay.
Okay, so can we please thank
Yeah,
our
yeah.
2 previous presenters very warmly for their visual takes so far. I am aware that people might have needs to take a rest break or to grab a coffee, or for example, if you need a little extra time to head over to a Puma hall, please do feel free to head out now or at any point. Otherwise, I will stay with you and we'll have a condensed version.
Well,
of your paper.
I'll keep it very short, okay? So yeah, sorry for being late, but it was really unforeseen circumstances. This is basically, I will just give a short insight into a project I'm currently doing together with Michael, also who cannot be here today, in Singapore, and that is actually adapting characters for an animated game in VR. And I am a professor of animation studies by trade. So what you see here is going to be a lot more visuals. And to cut a long story short here, we chose Pericles. It's not such a popular game, but that's not such a popular play. I'm already, jumping ahead to the game. But it's very well suitable for gamified adaptation. Here's just a short overview. You can read that for yourself, and I guess actually your papers will be made available, I guess, or we can. I will always send mine around if you'd like to. There are a lot of riddles and travels and kind of like episodic segments which are very suitable to an adaptation as a game and for a world discovery, which is really so important in games and suitable for games. You can just see, like, this is all images created by us for a project, and you can see here the influence of Southeast Asian shadow play via Kulit. So we basically transposed this kind of also more kind of fictional Mediterranean in Pericles all to Southeast Asia. In doing so, we intentionally stayed away from a completely realistic approach, but we took elements from all over Asia and tried to match certain parts of the game to it. And we also accordingly took different visual styles from different Asian regions, Southeast Asian regions. And the other thing what is of course apparent here is we made this anthropomorphic, used anthropomorphic characters, and our research so far, we haven't found so many animated anthropomorphic adaptations of Shakespeare, which, I mean, unless you count the Lion King, there's a big debate there about that, and Hamlet. Just gonna skip through quickly here to the some of our character studies, and then I have prepared, but I'm not going to go into detail too much here, 2 case studies which show how we connected a scene in Pericles, which is the tournament, with a gamified approach with AI, where you can be in the game and you can fight an AI character who is fighting back to you. Not really fighting, but more playfully fighting. And they also try to connect the local references or the local kind of quotations with where were used in the game. And one of the things here is, when we found out about one particular people or ethnicity there, that they simply don't have games in their culture, so we had to switch to something else. So whereas just like it gives you an insight of a much lot of little development which preceded the development for the game itself. And here you can see some setup for the tournament and how the development was developed into this kind of arena. We're also going to play with anachronisms, but this is more like, a historical huge football arena or something like that. And I'm just going to go for these. And the other case study was how to translate the Temple of Diana to a Southeast Asian setting. And you can see here first how we try to come up with an anthropomorphic version of her, which turned out to be a bird. And her temple, we finally looked into many temples in Southeast Asia, but then ended up with an amalgamation of different styles. Very much as Heritage itself throws together a lot of different influences. And so I promised to be short. Here we are, copy and be saved. So what we want to achieve is basically to maybe make a not so popular Shakespeare play, which is actually quite awesome, more popular. Secondly, to explore the R as, of course, modern digital media for education and mediation of classical literature. And that's the summary of it. And I think I was short. Thank you very much.
Very much, Professor Rall. That was an incredible, like a miraculously condensed version of your talk.
It's always, I learned in many conferences, if you're never dabble with a coffee break, so that's not a good idea. Okay.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay.
Well, perhaps in that case, at the mention of the coffee break, what I could suggest is that those who would like to hear more about Professor Rall's project can collar him over coffee and ask a little bit more. But of course, I'd also like to mention that I previously really enjoyed watching your short film, the short animation As You Like It, that was part of the World Shakespeare Conference, I think, last year, the year before. I'm, completely losing track of time here. And I really enjoyed seeing some of the synergies of style, the South Asian temples coming through. So thank you very much for doing an incredible feat there in editing, but also giving us a glimpse of your paper. And I'm sure people will think about connections between our other speakers.
Yeah, everybody would like to always get a full version of a page, of course, because it's, maybe it's a little bit of an exception because it's really just small with the visual as well, so.
Well, we had some wonderful conversations earlier about domesticization and foreignization of Shakespeare visually with our other speakers today. So you probably have many synergies to pull together over the coffee before we migrate to Okuma Hall. For those of you who've used the Waseda bus service, the hall is really adjacent to the bus terminus for Waseda. If you haven't used the bus terminus, if you head upstairs, exit right out the building, walk along the street, and you'll see a very rococo salon. And if you turn left there, you will soon see the Waseda bus shelters and the Okuma Hall behind it. So enjoy your coffee. Please talk to our speakers there. And yes, we will enjoy hearing much more about translation and Panelv very much.